Hey guys, it's Annabelle. Today I'm going to be doing a May reading wrap up. I've read 20 books in the month of May and I'm going to be showing you guys what those were and also sharing my ratings, what I liked or didn't like about each of the books, and if I would recommend them. Since we have a lot of books to get through, I'm just going to jump right in. So the first book that I read in May is The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. I don't know if I said that right at all, so I'm sorry if I didn't. This book is not a self-help book. It is basically a textbook on how trauma works and how it affects the brain and the body. I did kind of read it as if it was a self-help book. I would not recommend doing that. If you want to learn about trauma because somebody you know is going through it, or say you are going to go into a profession where you are going to be meeting a lot of people who may have endured trauma, then I think this book is definitely for you. But if you yourself has gone through trauma, I don't think that this is a good idea for you to read because it can be very triggering, which I knew ahead of time, and I had to keep my own mental health in mind while reading this. But I myself was fine, but definitely just do it as best for you. I gave this book 4 stars. The reason I gave it 4 stars was because it definitely had a lot of information, but this book is obviously not short, and I felt like a lot of the ideas and a lot of the information was repeated constantly throughout all of the different chapters and sections and stuff like that. Also, one other thing I want to mention, this was the first book I've ever tabbed. Clearly I didn't have actual tabs, I just cut sticky notes, and it doesn't look very pretty or organized, but I was just tabbing things that I related to or things that I thought were important or interesting. The next book I read was You Are a Badass by Jen Sincero. This is a self-help book. It was honestly really good. I had just gone through a terrible semester with nursing school. This definitely helped me feel a little bit better about it, and it gave me some new ideas and perspectives to look into when going into my next semester. I gave this 4 stars, so it definitely was good. Not only that, but this is very relatable. Also, as you can see, I tabbed this one as well, but I still didn't have normal tabs, so I was using sticky notes still. The next book I read was Happy Place by Emily Henry. This was actually my first Emily Henry book that I've ever read, and I absolutely loved it. For those of you who do not know, this book is about a group of friends who had been friends for a very long time, and they would always go to this lake house in Maine, go every single summer. However, 2 of the friends were engaged at one point, but had broken up, and they hadn't told their friends. So they end up still going on this trip, and they have to pretend that they are still in a relationship so that they don't ruin the trip or disappoint their friends. I loved the dynamic between all of the characters in this book, and I also love that Emily Henry has a way of adding so much depth to her characters and making them feel like real people, which makes it just so much more relatable, and I absolutely loved it. I gave this book 4 stars, and I would absolutely read it again 100 times over again because it was just that good. I did also tab this one, still didn't have actual tabs, so I used sticky notes. Luckily, it matched with the cover. The next book I read was Butcher and Blackbird by Brynne Weaver. I was very excited to read this book because I knew it was going to be a rom-com. I loved the idea of 2, I don't know what I can and can't say on here, 2 serial unalivers who are only unaliving people who deserve it. So they feel like they're doing society a favor, basically. It's a rom-com, so there's romance, there's comedy, it was very funny. There's also some very gross things that happen in this book, so definitely check the trigger warning list at the beginning of this. I did like it quite a bit. It was very entertaining. Definitely not a book I think I would ever read again, but it was entertaining, so I gave it 4 stars. Sorry that most of these first books are all 4 stars, but I promise there will be some other ratings coming up soon. Also, again, did not have normal tabs, so I used sticky notes. I actually used markers to color over the sticky notes so that they matched the cover. The next book I read was Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. This was actually my first 5-star read of the month, and it is tied for my favorite book of this month. I adored this book in every way possible. It was so good. I loved the fantasy aspect, but it is more romance heavy, which I absolutely loved, but I loved both aspects of it. I definitely would say if you're kind of a beginner to fantasy but you want to get into it, this is probably good because there isn't much fantasy in it. It's more romance heavy, like I said before. But I just loved the idea of these two characters who work together, who don't like each other, and then are sending letters back and forth to each other through a magical typewriter. But they don't know that they're writing to each other. It's actually just so cute. It's very cute, and I loved it. I loved everything about it. As you can see, I tabbed a lot more in here. I did not have the right tabs yet, once again, and I also used markers on my sticky notes so that it would match. The difference you can see in my tabbing is that I made it more organized. Instead of tabbing right where I underlined, I would just go in a line so that it looked more cohesive. The next book I read was The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. This was actually a reread for me. I've read this book 3 times now. I read it once in middle school because we had to. I read it once in high school, and now I just reread it again, and this time I tabbed it with the correct tabs. I got these on Amazon. They're transparent, so if you're tabbing over words, you can still see through. And as you can see, I tabbed quite a lot. This is one of my all-time favorite books, so obviously it's 5 stars. I absolutely love it. I love the characters. You get so connected with these characters, and I just love it so much for that. It's very fast, it's quick-paced, and it's short. So if you want a quick read, this is a really good one. For those of you who do not know what it's about, which I'd be kind of shocked if you didn't, it's basically this group of boys who are not on a great side of the town. This takes place in the 60s, I believe. But anyway, they are not on a great side of the town. There's a lot of crime, there's a lot of violence, and they do not get along with the rich kids who live on the south side of the town. And that's pretty much all you need to know going into this, because if I said anything else, it'd be spoiling it. But honestly, this book is so good. It's so fast-paced, there's a lot of action, there's a lot of emotion that happens in here, whether it be happy or sad. It's kind of impossible not to get attached to these characters. I could talk about this book for hours, honestly. I absolutely love it. And the movie as well is really great. It has a lot of actors who are really big today, when they were just teenagers, which is really cool to like look back and see them acting when they were little. So yeah, I don't want to ramble on about this book for too long, but if you haven't read it, seriously go read it, because you're gonna love it. I don't think anybody would dislike this book. The next book I read was Flawless by Elsie Silver. This is the first book in the Chestnut Spring series, and there is a suggested reading order, but I'm doing it in a different order because I saw somebody on TikTok suggest it, because there's technically 2 orders you can follow. You can go in the order of the books, which is Flawless, Heartless, Powerless, Reckless, and Hopeless. I read Flawless, and I just read Reckless 2 days ago, so that'll be in my June wrap-up. But the reading order I'm going with is Flawless, Reckless. You can either do Powerless or Heartless next, but Hopeless has to be last. The reason I decided to read Flawless and then Reckless is because this one is about Summer and Rhett, and Reckless is about Winter and Theo, and Summer and Winter are sisters, so you get a lot of the same characters in this book. Also, doing it in that order, you're not really spoiling anything about any of the other couples, because these are technically standalones. It's just if you read them out of the correct order, you might get little spoilers of other couples, but I already know that all these couples are gonna end up together, so if I see them together, it's like whatever. I still don't know their story or like how they got to where they are then, you know? So technically I don't feel like I'm spoiling anything for myself. I gave this book 4 stars. I absolutely loved it. I love country music, western vibes, everything about that, and this was very country, small town. It's great. If you love small town romances, the Chestnut Spring series is for you. It's so good. The next book, I already know what you guys are thinking. Why did it take you so long to start the series? Well, I've had the entire series on my shelves for about 6 or 7 months and have had no interest to start reading it until I finally forced myself in May. And let me just say, it's good so far because I haven't finished it. I've only read the first 2 books, so I started A Court of Thorns and Roses, and I know what you're thinking. Why does it look like that? I didn't like the bright colors. They didn't really fit my bookshelf, so I made a new cover on Canva, got it printed at Staples, and then put it on my book. I gave this book 4.5 stars, which is crazy. I would have given this book 5 stars, but I don't usually like to do that for the first book of a series because there's always room for improvement. And obviously the first book of a series, especially in fantasy, there's going to be a lot of world building, which I'm typically not really a fan of. It really depends if it's done well, which I felt like it wasn't here. It did get a little bit slow at times, but I did feel like I was entertained the whole time and I was interested the whole time, which is why I gave it 4.5 instead of 5. And then the day after that, I started A Court of Mist and Fury. This is what I did for that cover. I'm trying to keep with the same theme of the actual covers of the book, just more muted down and more pastel. I gave this book 5 stars. I don't know how much I can say about this series without spoiling it for anybody who hasn't read it, which is why I'm not saying too much. This book was really good though. All I'm gonna say is if you were like me and have been hesitant about starting this series, just start it. Just do it. Force yourself to get through the first book because it does get better. I'm currently maybe about a quarter of the way through the 3rd book, so I'm not going to show you all of the covers I designed right now, but you will see them in future reading vlogs or reading wrap-ups. Since I binged the first 2 ACOTAR books, I needed a little bit of a break from fantasy, so I put that series to the side and I picked up Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. Now, if you remember when I said there was a book tied with Divine Rivals for my favorite book of May, this is the one that is tied with it. This was so good. All of the summer vibes that I absolutely love. This is a new release. I think it came out in April. If you guys don't know what this book is about, it's basically about a girl named Emma who has a hard time when it comes to dating. Every guy that she dates, the second they break up, her ex immediately finds the one, the person they're gonna marry, their soulmate. She eventually sees on Reddit that this guy posts about his situation and it's the same as hers. The second he breaks up with somebody or they break up with him, his ex finds their soulmate or the one they're gonna marry. So they end up getting into contact and they come up with this plan where they're going to fake date each other and then break up so that they can hopefully find the one they're supposed to be with. Not only is this a romance, I think Abby Jimenez did a really great job adding depth to the characters. They go through very real world situations and things that just make them feel like real people. They're both dealing with family issues and drama and mental health issues. Like the main character in this book, Emma, she is dealing with PTSD. I also really love that Abby Jimenez will add in healthcare workers to her books. I'm a nursing student. I'm also a nurse assistant right now as a job, so I really love that she does that. It makes me, and I'm sure so many other healthcare workers, feel very appreciated. Also, Emma is a travel nurse. I obviously loved that, and I loved the humor and comedy in this book throughout, but I really loved the humor when it came to nursing in general and the unit she was gonna have to work on because that was very relatable. So I absolutely loved this, and this was a 5-star read for me. I read the Good Girl's Guide to Murder trilogy. This is the first book, which is A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. This book was so good. It kept me on my toes. It's a really great thriller. It's about this girl named Pip, who is a senior in high school and she has to do her capstone project or senior project. I know at my high school it was called the senior project, but a lot of other schools will call it a capstone project. So for her project, she picks to investigate into a murder that happened in her town 5 years prior. And the victim was the popular girl in school and the suspect was her boyfriend at the time, but he ended up unaliving himself. So the case went cold, but Pip decides to investigate into it to prove that he is innocent. This gave me Pretty Little Liars vibes. For most of the book, the ending was way off from Pretty Little Liars, and I was playing along and trying to investigate too, and I got it wrong. And I love books like that because this was not predictable. There is no way anybody could have predicted the ending to this. So the second book is Good Girl Bad Blood. This one I want to say was a little bit slower. It took a little while longer to kind of get into what was really happening, but it was still really interesting and still really good. Also, I forgot to mention, I gave this one 5 stars. It definitely took a little while longer for this to get into all of the thriller stuff and the investigations and stuff like that. But this one is based around somebody else in her town who goes missing. So now she is in real time trying to figure out and find this person. So this one is a little bit harder to figure out and definitely harder for her because there isn't any information already out there into the world. She's doing this all on herself. Not only that, but in this book, she's no longer doing her senior project, obviously, because that's all done, but she created a podcast where she's documenting all of the information she's gathered from the investigation. So I gave this one 4 stars. Now, the third and final book in the Your Girl's Guide to Murder series is As Good as Dead. I gave this one 5 stars. This one was crazy, actually crazy. Ending was perfect. It tied all 3 books together in a little bow, and it was just so good, so good. If I could give this book 6 stars on Goodreads, I probably would because it was just that good. And I hate when people say that when they're like, oh, the last book in the series is the best, but like, I would say the first book is really good and it'll get you into the series, but this is really good. Like, it's so good. And I don't know how much I can tell you about this because I would be spoiling. I would say go into this one blind because you already know the characters. You already know kind of what's happening for the most part. But this one was very shocking. There was a lot of plot twists that happened in this and it was so good. The next book I read was The 7-Year Slip. I gave this one 4 stars. I didn't really like it that much. I thought there was going to be more going on. This is basically about a girl who lost her aunt and she ends up inheriting her apartment. And through her childhood, when she would be with her aunt would tell her, oh, this apartment is magic. Just a lot of stuff. There's a lot of background that we get about that throughout the whole story. But once she starts living in this apartment, she starts seeing this man, but he is living 7 years in the past. And from him, she is living 7 years in the present, or into the future. So yeah, that's basically all I'm going to tell you about this. It is very cute. I just thought that this was going to be a lot different than what it was, but I do love that magic was weaved into a romance book without it being fantasy. Now, the last physical book I read in May was Beach Read by Emily Henry. I absolutely loved this book. It was so good. I loved the dynamic between these 2 characters, and again, like I said about Emily Henry before, she does a really great job at adding depth to her characters and making them feel very real. They're going through their own issues and they're going through issues that so many people in the real world have gone through and probably are going through. This book, again, I know I'm late to the party on this, but if you haven't read it, this book is about January Andrews, who writes romance novels. And she ends up going to a beach house. Sorry, I had to change how I was sitting. She ends up going to a beach house and her enemy from college ends up going there too, and they're polar opposites. He also writes books, but he never writes a happy ending. He'll kill off main characters. So they come up with this deal where she is going to write a story that doesn't end with a happy ending, and he is going to write a story that does end up with a happy ending. So with that, they both have to take each other places for inspiration and stuff like that. I love the last sentence of the back of the book that says, everyone will finish a book and no one will fall in love. Really. Definitely read this. I gave this 4 stars. Hey everyone, I was just editing this video and I realized that for some reason one of my 5-star reads didn't get recorded and I cannot find the footage anywhere. So I'm going to review it right now because it needs to make it into May's reading wrap up. So I read A Little Life, which I honestly have a lot to say about it. It was a 5-star read. I tabbed it a lot. This is probably one of my most tabbed books. I even tabbed the top for the different sections that are in it. One thing I want to say, this is a very character-driven book. book. It is not plot driven. There is definitely a lot of heavy subject matter in here, so definitely keep that in mind. Definitely check the trigger warnings before you read this book. I'm sure a lot of you have seen this on TikTok. I'm not going to go into too much detail about what this book is about, what it goes into, what it covers. If you are interested in this, definitely do research. I would look on TikTok for people's reactions while reading this to see if you really want to put yourself through the emotional damage that this book will cause. And again, like I've already said, please check the trigger warnings because this book has so many trigger warnings, and if anything is going to trigger you in this book, do not read it. There's moments of on-page situations that could definitely harm somebody's mental health. And you're probably wondering, why did I give this 5 stars? It was beautifully written. There are so many amazing quotes in this book. Not only that, but I really wouldn't recommend this to somebody, but at the same time I really would recommend this because not only did this break me because I became so incredibly attached to these characters, it also changed my entire perspective on life, and I look at things a completely different way than I did before reading this book. So that is definitely something that you can think about if you are thinking about reading this book, but again, just keep yourself in mind, check the trigger warnings. Okay, let's get back into the actual video. I'm about to talk about the 4 books that I read on my Kindle. Okay, now the next 4 books were all books that I read on my Kindle. The first one I'm going to talk about is The Good Husband by Steve Fretch. This is a thriller, and the reason I was drawn to reading this on Kindle Unlimited was because I was looking for a thriller specifically, but I was looking for one that was going to keep me engaged, one that I could literally sit down and just binge the entire thing. I feel like you guys should go in blindly to this book, and I feel like it'll be better. It was crazy. There was not a slow moment. They're short chapters, and so many plot twists. So many plot twists. It's also kind of a mystery as well, which is really great. I gave this book 5 stars, and I probably would read this again, like in a couple years when maybe I've forgotten what happened. After I read that, I decided to read another Steve Fretch book, so I read Deadly Games. I wanted to read another thriller, and I wanted it to be kind of fast-paced like that one was, so I figured to go with another one of his books. This one kind of disappointed me. It was still very interesting. I got through it, but it wasn't as good as The Good Husband, and I ended up giving it 3 stars because I had really high hopes for it, high expectations, and it did not live up to those. Next book I read was The Grace Year by Kim Liggett. This is almost similar to The Hunger Games. It's basically about when girls turn 16, they have to go on what is called a grace year, which is when they go into the woods with a bunch of other girls around their age, and they must expel their magic for this entire year before they can get married. There's a lot of real world situations regarding women that are tucked into this book very perfectly, which I loved. I did really enjoy that, but I honestly didn't really enjoy this book. I felt like it was too slow for me, but the concept was there. It just didn't live up to what I wanted it to be, so I gave it 3 stars. Now, the last book I read in May. I feel like you guys are gonna laugh at me. I read a French children's book. I read Un Petit Prince, which is The Little Prince. And yes, I did read the French version. I did not read the English version. It's only 96 pages. And I know what you're thinking, that's a children's book. Why were you reading a children's book? It's really not. It's a lot more than that. Look it up on TikTok if you want to hear it from other people, but it's much more than that. Anybody at any age should read this book because there are so many beautiful quotes in it. It touches on a lot of relatable emotions when it comes to growing up. I ended up giving it 4 stars because I thought it was beautifully written, and I have so many quotes that I absolutely adored from that book. So anyways, that was my May reading wrap up. I hope you guys enjoyed. I have to go film a few more other videos, so I will see you guys later. I hope you have a great day. Bye!